The coin hits the table and doesn't sound right. Not sharp, not clean, dull. A merchant picks it up between two fingers, turns it under the light. The sun is low, slipping through the awning, catching the emperor's face stamped into the metal. Perfect profile, perfect lettering. Looks official. He presses his thumbnail into the edge. It flakes, just slightly, enough. A thin gray skin peels back, and underneath, something darker. Cheaper, wrong. He doesn't say anything at first, just sets the coin down, slides it back across the table with two fingers. Slow. The soldier across from him shifts his weight. Armor creaks. Hand tightens on the hilt without realizing it. Same value, the soldier says. The merchant doesn't answer. He's already looking past him, at the next man in line, then the next. Same coins, same problem. By the end of that week, he stops taking them entirely. No announcement, no decree, just a quiet refusal. Across the city, the same thing happens. Then the next city, then the next province. And somewhere far from that table, in a palace that still smells of polished marble and incense, the emperor orders more coins to be struck. More silver. At least that's what the stamp says. Here's the question most people never ask about the collapse of fall of the Western Roman Empire. Not how it ended, but when people first realized the money was already gone, the breakdown didn't begin with invasion. It began with a quiet change in the metal. Under Augustus, the denarius was nearly pure silver, stable, trusted, heavy in the hand. It moved everything: wages, grain, rent, tax. A soldier on the frontier, a trader in Alexandria, a farmer in Gaul. They all recognized it without question. That recognition was the system. Then the cost started to outrun reality. Two frontiers, constant pressure. Northern tribes probing the borders. In the east, a resurgent Persia, forcing Rome into wars it couldn't avoid. Armies had to be paid, roads repaired, grain shipments secured. The treasury couldn't keep up, not at the pace the empire demanded. So the emperors adjusted the coin. Under Caracalla, the silver content was cut nearly in half. Same size, same stamp, same declared value, but less metal inside. By the time of Gallienus, the denarius had collapsed to a fraction of its original purity, sometimes less than 5% silver, the rest base metal with a thin wash to maintain the illusion. The coin still circulated, at first. Then prices shifted, quietly, then quickly. A sack of grain cost more, then twice as much. Then nobody would sell grain at all unless the payment was something real. Metal by weight, not by face. This is the mechanism most summaries skip. Debasement didn't just cause inflation, it broke trust at the transaction level. Every exchange became a negotiation. Every coin, a question. Between 235 and 284 AD, the period known as the crisis of the 3rd century, that breakdown compounded with everything else. Civil war, plague, political fragmentation. Nearly 50 emperors in 5 decades. Most didn't die in office. They were removed. The economy didn't collapse all at once. It unraveled transaction by transaction. And in that unraveling, most wealth disappeared. But not all of it. Some of it moved, quietly, into very specific forms. Asset 1, gold, but only the kind you could trust. The scale sits on a wooden table, not decorative, functional, worn smooth where hands have used it 1,000 times. A man places a coin on one side, not a denarius. He watches the balance, adjusts a small weight, leans closer. The room smells faintly of oil and dust. No one speaks. This is how large transactions are happening now. Not by stamp, by weight. When Constantine the Great introduced the solidus in the early 4th century, it looked like a simple reform. A new coin, high purity, consistent weight. But functionally, it was something else. It was a reset of trust. The solidus wasn't accepted because the emperor said so. It was accepted because it could be tested, weighed, verified without needing to believe in the system that issued it. That distinction matters, because by this point, Roman markets had already learned the hard lesson. A coin is not the metal it claims to be. Gold survived the collapse, but not all gold equally. Clipped coins circulated. Adulterated bars appeared. Fraud spread as fast as fear. The people who preserved wealth were not those who simply held gold. They held gold that could be proven in a direct exchange. No intermediary, no institution, just metal. Kyle Harper's work on late Roman economic behavior shows a shift away from denominated currency toward aurum by weight. pure gold measured at the point of transaction. The form mattered less than the verifiability. This is the first principle. In a failing monetary system, trust migrates away from symbols and toward what cannot be altered without detection. The stamp failed. The metal remained. Asset 2, debt, the mechanism, nobody sees until it's over. A contract sits rolled in a leather tube. It's simple, numbers scratched in ink. A loan made years ago, clear terms, fixed amount, fixed repayment, 100,000 denarii. At the time it was written, that number meant something real. Land, labor, output. Now the borrower unrolls it again, runs a finger along the line. 100,000, same number, different world. By the late 3rd century, the purchasing power of the denarius had collapsed alongside its silver content. Prices adjusted, goods repriced, but the contract did not. It didn't adapt. It couldn't. The borrower repaid the loan in full. Same number of coins, same nominal value. But the metal inside those coins was almost gone. This is not incidental, it is structural. Inflation, especially rapid debasement-driven inflation, does not affect all participants equally. It creates a directional transfer. From creditor to the debtor, the lender provided value in high-quality money. They received repayment in degraded money. The borrower, meanwhile, retained the asset purchased with the original loan, land, infrastructure, productive capacity, while the real burden of the debt eroded over time. Peter Heather's analysis of late Roman aristocracy highlights this dynamic. Large landowners who had taken on debt obligations earlier in the empire's stable period found those obligations effectively dissolved during the crisis. Their estates remained intact. Their liabilities did not. This is the second principle. In a collapsing currency regime, fixed debt becomes a shrinking claim against expanding nominal values. Or more simply, debt doesn't just disappear, it is destroyed in real terms. The system doesn't announce this. It happens quietly, through price movement, through metal dilution, through time. And by the time it becomes obvious, the transfer is already complete. Asset 3, the self-sufficient estate. Not land, but independence. The gates are closed before sunset, not out of habit, out of necessity. Inside the estate, activity doesn't stop. It shifts inward. Smoke rises from ovens. Tools hang on walls. Grain is measured, not traded. Outside, the roads are less predictable now. Caravans don't arrive on schedule. Sometimes they don't arrive at all. This is where the distinction appears. Owning land was not enough. A landowner producing olives for export, dependent on trade routes, on shipping lanes, on distant markets, he was exposed. His land required the system to function. When the system fractured, so did his income. But a different type of estate had been developing quietly over decades. A closed system. Grain fields, livestock, workshops, storage, skilled labor on site, blacksmiths, carpenters, weavers, everything needed for basic function existed within the perimeter. Adrian Goldsworthy documents how during the later imperial period, many large villas expanded their internal production capacity. Not for efficiency, for resilience. They were reducing dependency. When the broader Roman trade network contracted and eventually fragmented, these estates didn't collapse. They contracted less. They adapted faster because they were already operating at a lower level of external reliance. Brian Ward Perkins' archaeological work shows that while urban infrastructure degraded rapidly, pottery quality declined, construction simplified, the large villa estates continued producing, albeit at reduced complexity. They didn't maintain Rome. They outlasted it. And something else happened. As imperial authority weakened, tax collectors disappeared, military protection thinned, the estate owner's role changed. He wasn't just a producer. He became a local anchor, providing food, security, stability. This is where the transition begins, from Roman economy to early medieval structure, from empire to localized control. This is the third principle. In systemic collapse, assets that depend on complexity fail with it. Assets that reduce dependency become centers of continuity. The estate didn't just survive, it became the next system. Asset 4, irreplaceable skill. What still trades when nothing else does. A tool breaks in the field. Mid-season, there's no shipment coming to replace it. No warehouse to pull from. No delay acceptable. The farmer walks, finds the one man who can fix it. The blacksmith doesn't ask for coins first. He looks at the metal, tests it, nods. The exchange happens. Not because of price stability, because of necessity. When institutional structures dissolve, Courts, contracts, formal employment, value reverts to function. Immediate function, the physician who can treat infection without imported compounds. The carpenter who can reinforce a structure before weather arrives. The miller who turns grain into usable food. These are not abstract skills. They are non-optional. They retain value because they cannot be deferred. Joseph Tainter's framework for collapse identifies this clearly. As complexity decreases, specialization tied to that complexity becomes redundant. Administrative roles, legal functions, bureaucratic expertise, these require a functioning system. When that system contracts, so does the need for those roles. But fundamental skills, those tied directly to survival and production, remain. They operate at any level of complexity. There is a second category, less visible but equally important. The merchant who can operate across fragmented systems. Rome's collapse did not eliminate trade entirely. It disrupted it, fragmented it, localized it. But goods still moved. And the individuals who could navigate multiple regions, languages, power structures, who could carry trusted forms of value, like the solidus, across unstable boundaries, retained immense economic relevance. They became connectors in a broken network. Kyle Harper notes that certain Eastern Mediterranean trade routes continued functioning long after the Western Empire dissolved. Not at scale, but consistently enough to sustain exchange. Those networks were not maintained by institutions. They were maintained by individuals. Portable skill sets, portable trust. This is the fourth principle. When systems fail, value concentrates in capabilities that remain necessary regardless of structure, and in those who can move between structures when they fragment. Everything else depends on the system surviving. These do not. 4 assets. Gold you could verify. Debt that dissolved. Land that didn't depend. Skills that couldn't be replaced. They weren't theoretical. They were selected slowly, unevenly, but decisively by the collapse itself. The pattern didn't end with Rome. It rarely does. 17 centuries later, in Weimar hyperinflation, the same mechanism reappears. Cleaner, faster, documented in photographs instead of pottery shards. A man stands in line holding a stack of banknotes tied with string, not folded, carried. The paper has weight now, but not value. By the time he reaches the counter, the price has already changed. Again, behind him someone leaves the line, not in frustration, to spend the money immediately before it loses more purchasing power. The speed is different from Rome. The structure is not. Industrialists who had borrowed heavily before the inflation, factories, machinery, land, paid back those debts in currency that had collapsed in real terms. Their balance sheets cleared themselves. Their assets remained. Creditors, savers, bondholders, pensioners, held claims on money that no longer functioned. Same transfer, same direction. Move forward again, different system, same pressure. In Argentina, during repeated currency crises, residents don't wait for formal collapse. They convert early, dollars under mattresses, real estate, durable goods, anything that doesn't rely on the peso maintaining stability. The behavior looks informal. It isn't. It's adaptive. Across each of these cases, Rome, Weimar, modern inflationary economies, the surface details change. Coins to paper, empire to nation-state, local markets to global trade. But the underlying pattern holds. Trust in currency weakens. Transactions shift. Assets that depend on stability begin to fail. Assets that can operate without it begin to concentrate value. No announcement marks the transition. It shows up in behavior first, then in prices, then in outcomes. The pattern is consistent. It doesn't repeat in detail, it repeats in structure. And it leaves behind a set of constraints, quiet rules that show up every time a monetary system comes under pressure. First, separate the asset from the claim on the asset. Rome's citizens held coins that looked like silver, but weren't. In every era, the distinction reappears in a different form. What matters is not what something is called, but whether its value can be verified independently of the system issuing it. Second, understand how inflation redistributes, not just erodes. It is easy to think of inflation as a general loss. It is more precise to see it as a transfer. Fixed obligations behave differently from real assets. Contracts written in nominal terms can shift dramatically in real value when the unit itself changes. Third, evaluate dependency, not just ownership. An asset that requires stable supply chains, functioning institutions, or continuous external inputs carries hidden risk. The more layers required to keep it productive, the more points of failure it contains. Fourth, prioritize capabilities over credentials. Systems validate credentials. Reality validates function. Skills that solve immediate, unavoidable problems retain exchange value even when formal structures degrade. None of these are predictions. They are constraints. They don't tell you what will happen next. They define what tends to hold when the system around it begins to move. And importantly, these shifts don't begin at collapse. They begin quietly in how people transact. The coin didn't fail the day it lost its silver. It failed the day someone stopped accepting it. That moment, quiet, local, almost invisible, is where systems begin to break. Rome didn't collapse in a single event. It unraveled through millions of small refusals, small adjustments, small shifts in behavior. And in those shifts, value moved. Not randomly, not evenly, predictably. What endured wasn't what the system said was valuable. It was what functioned without the system. Gold that could be tested, debt that dissolved, land that didn't depend, skills that couldn't be replaced. The pattern is older than Rome. It will outlast any system built after it. The only question is whether you recognize it while it's happening or after.